Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
So now the Browns are in a search for the defensive coordinator. Now, a lot of us felt like this job would pretty much go to somebody in-house, but it seems like the Browns' aspirations have expanded past what we thought those not expectations, but those, aspirations to be, as the Browns are interviewing a lot of people, right? So there has been some news. This has been reposted by Daniel OYEFUSI of ESPN, in addition to Aubrey Pleasant. In addition to Aubrey Pleasant and Jonathan Cooley, who have gotten DC interviews, the Browns have requested to interview Giants outside linebacker coach Charlie Bullen as their DC opening, as NFL Network first reported. So the Rams assistant head coach and passing game coordinator, remember they have two pass game coordinators, one for the defense, one for the offense. Aubrey Pleasant has interviewed for the open defensive coordinator job. Also, Cooley has interviewed for the defensive coordinator job. They're definitely looking for somebody who's on the rise, and that makes sense given that one of the demands of this job is that you're going to have to really just stick with what the staff has. So you're not going to bring in a bunch of your own guys at different positions. You're sticking with the defensive line coach. You're sticking with the safeties coach. It is going to be interesting to see, if they don't go with the in-house hire, how those guys react. Remember Jim Schwartz. You don't want another mini version of Jim Schwartz going on inside that building and having another blow up or something like that. And it will be interesting because the Browns have a pretty experienced defensive staff, and some of the names that they're going after are up and coming guys. And there is a question of like, hey, do these guys have what it takes to be able to step into a room with veteran coaches and be able to command that level of respect, not just from the coaching staff, but also from the defense, right? This defense is not the same story as the offense, right? Where the offense side of the ball, I was talking to Tyvis about this in a video it's going to release later this week about this, and he made a point of like the jobs for offense and defense is just so incredibly different because the offense is looking for a leader, right? And that's what Todd Monken is going to provide: some structure, some leadership, hopefully some discipline to that side of the ball, as well as like just being able to educate and develop. The defensive side of the ball is just a different beast, right? Like that thing's ready built. You got a lot of guys who are very accomplished, right? In a lot of ways, that can be a blessing and that can be a curse. Because players who are accomplished, they know what they're doing. And that can be helpful and that can be unhelpful. Because sometimes they know what they're doing to a point to where they're not going to do anything different. They're not going to go about doing anything different. And they're not going to be receptive to you telling them that they're going to do things differently. So if you're on the program of what those guys want to do, then okay. But those guys have figured themselves out. It's a bit of a different job, right? And I wonder if it makes sense for an up-and-comer to get that role, because probably going to be more willing to let these stars do what they do, which is good, right, and put them in a position to be successful. Also, I think this job would be very attractive, despite the fact that you can't bring in a bunch of guys to run it with you. I think it'll be very attractive because it's a ready-made position. You're being asked to elevate. And you have a great roster to begin with, and this is a way to raise your profile in a pretty good way, right? The Browns have the equivalent of a defense of a quarterback, right? So a lot of people are going to be attracted to this position. Now, some might be asking the question of like, hey, why would the Browns be trying to get somebody from outside of the building? And that might be because of what we saw with the Super Bowl. Right? What you saw in the playoffs this year. And what we saw there was a bunch of teams that were defensive oriented, that were able to provide answers to offenses and able to win with offenses that aren't top tier. They're not bottom shelf, right? Like you need to get a acceptable offense. You know what I mean? And look, I don't want to downplay the gap between where the Browns are as far as quarterback play is considered and where Sam Darnold is, or even Drake May. But the Browns are pretty far apart from what they have right now to where those teams are. And even a team like the Texans who have CJ Stroud, I mean, we would kill for CJ Stroud in Cleveland, right? So we're far away from the quarterback position. And I don't want to make light of that journey that the Browns are going to have to be on. But where they aren't far away is being that level of a defense. And they might think, hey, we bring in somebody from the outside. They might be able to bring in some fresh ideas. They might be able to have a variation of the approach that Jim Schwartz was going to bring here. And that might be enough to make us less predictable defensively and clean up some of the last few holes on this defense. And maybe that's something that can really elevate this team to a place where the Texans are or where the Seahawks could be if the Browns can close that gap from the quarterback position. I think that's something that they have to consider. You know, there's going to be suitors for this job. There are going to be people who are plenty interested in this job. I think the Browns defense just offers a lot of areas to potentially be successful here. We're going to talk more about what the Browns can do and what the vision can be. I'm also going to try to get a clip from Daniel OYEFUSI of ESPN to talk about what he knows about the latest of this defensive coordinator search. But first, got to thank my sponsor, Sleeper.
Hey, have you heard of the Sleeper app? It is a place where you can go to play fantasy football. It's also a place you can go to do picks. You can put your knowledge on the line, make some picks, and see who knows ball the most, and maybe even, be rewarded for your knowledge. Go on the Sleeper app. Make sure you sign up using the promo code WORSTTAKE, and you'll get a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code WORSTTAKE. Make sure you check out the Sleeper app.
So fortunately, the way things broke in the schedule, I was able to get Daniel OYEFUSI on the show. So here's his thoughts on what's going on and what's the latest to know about the Browns defensive coordinator situation. All right, I got Daniel OYEFUSI in. It's funny that the timing just happened to work out this way where we're supposed to talk, and then also news breaks about the defensive coordinator hire or the defensive coordinator search. Well, what do you think the Browns are looking for, and do you think they're seriously going to consider some of these outside candidates that they're bringing in?
Yeah, it's really interesting because obviously, they've interviewed kind of the two main internal candidates that I think people were really eyeing and looking at when it came to replacing Jim Schwartz and Ephraim Bander, the safeties coach, and Jason Tarver, the linebackers coach. But now they started to put out these requests for external interviews, and they're going about that process. Starting that today. What one thing that stood out to me was the amount of passing game coordinators, people that are involved with the back end that really stood out to me. Only for the simple fact that like Tom Monken said he was going to keep this scheme, and I guess like when people think of this scheme, they think of kind of like the 4-3 attacking, leaning into maybe like a lot of man coverage, cover three, single high looks, stuff like that. But I feel like if you're Tom Monken and you're trying to take this team to the next level, like you can't just like s- solely stick with status quo with this defense. And I think that for me, a lot of the things that I'd be looking at is continuing to play to the strength of this defense, but maybe on the back end, like being disguising the looks more and kind of being a little more creative with the use of some of the DBs and the secondary. Which I think that with Jim, like Jim had a very like set in stone scheme, and like even Miles said it, like he is, he's stubborn almost to a fault, where like he's gonna do things that he doesn't. But when you look at like these new age defenses, like honestly, a lot of them are playing like cover two, like too high shells and stuff like that. But they disguise so much pre snap because these quarterbacks have gotten too good and offenses have gotten too good. So with just like some of the names in terms of like RB Pleasant with the Rams and some of the other folks that they've requested, like the pass game coordinator background is something that sticks out to me because I'm thinking like, okay, well, how can you maximize a Grant Delpit even more than maybe he's been used recently? How can you maximize a Ronnie Hickman? What can you do in the back end to really even complement the front even more already. Because like I feel like things are kind of simple up front with them. Like they're gonna rush forward, they're gonna be attacking. But what can you do on the back end to make things even harder on some of these offenses? That's what sticks out to me with some of the guys that they've brought in to interview.
Yeah, it is interesting that they are going for these back end guys. It makes sense if you want to improve anything with the Jim Schwartz system. It has been, it's a little bit too vanilla in the back end at times, right? It's just kind of like 70-30 man splits at times with them.
Which is unheard of, like in this day and age of like modern defenses. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's something you get away with when you're like at college and you just got better talent than everybody else, right?
Yeah.
But how much of this do you feel like is like a Todd Monken led process, or do you feel like this is something where this is an organizational decision at defensive coordinator? Because I think that's kind of been an overarching question throughout this whole head coach hire, which is like how much control is the head coach going to have over the defense?
Yeah, well, I would say I would expect like Andrew Barry is, as GM and, vice president of football operations, like I would expect him to be extreme or executive vice president of football operations. I would expect him to be extremely involved in this process, just like he was obviously like leading the head coaching search, just like he was even the year before, with helping out with the offensive coordinator hire that obviously ultimately went to Tommy Reese. But it is interesting because like I think that it's like it's gonna kind of sound like Brown's talking points, but like you want there to be alignment, like you want to see the game in the same way to the point where like you don't have these like big differences. But it is an interesting question because now that Monken is head coach and now that Jim Schwartz is out, it's like well he really you do really have to let him create the team in his image. And really like if that's the case, then you would think that maybe he'd bring in an outside name. And there were some reports about some guys with the Texans who play a similar scheme up front, and have some of those guys who have experience or past with Todd Monken potentially coming in for interviews. It is interesting. Like this is this really a Monken led hire, or is this like a Barry hire? Because he's already stated like he likes the way they play on defense. He's built this defense in his current iteration and image. But you would think, based off what he said in the introductory news conference, like we're aligned in the way we see things. You would think that it would get to the point where maybe you don't even have that big of a difference when it comes to the DC hire.
Do you think internally they're worried about another Jim Schwartz situation happening with like either Bandon not getting the job or maybe Tarver not getting the job, and then being able to retain, not like they're going to be able to retain him contractually, but being able to retain a positive working relationship, despite like the awkwardness of, hey, we might go and hire some 30-year-old who to be your boss, even though you
Yeah.
interviewed for this position, which is always a tough spot.
Yeah, it is a tough spot, and like Jim isn't the first guy that's been passed over for a job that he really wanted by his organization. And I was just really literally as you were saying that, I was thinking to past teams that I've covered, where the assistant was passed over for a promotion, and they
Mhm.
were at the combine we're talking, they're like, yeah, like I'm done with them, da da da. I think that was a very unique situation, especially with Jim, with his tenure, with his aspirations to become a head coach again. I think that in this case, I don't think we're gonna get a Jim situation where they're pretty much publicly saying declaring that they're not coming back. I don't think so. I just think that big picture, like if you are looking for continuity, like you talk about, we're not changing the scheme. They're gonna play the same exact way. It would make sense to bring to elevate a coach that is coached under and assisted Jim Schwartz in the formation of this scheme and this defense in Cleveland. It would make sense. But again, this is an opportunity for Monken to potentially put his stamp on this team and really build this team in his image.
Do you know if there's like a timeline they're hoping to stick by for this hire?
I mean, when we asked Monken about putting the staff together, he said, "Hey, it's going to take as long as we need." He's talking about Southern Miss or whatever. They were, or was it Ole Miss? Somewhere they were interviewing eight safeties just to get the safety eight safeties coaches just to get the right one. But obviously like on a serious matter, like I think that like by you want something by the combine. That's when you're gonna send all those assistants out there and start meeting with these prospects and stuff like that. And in addition, they need to start the process of like evaluating this roster. Like a lot of people have been talking about what's going on with the QB and whatever. And I think part of the reason why Monken was really non-committal was the fact that like he hasn't even really like dove into this roster, like in its true, like really did a deep dive on this roster. He was coaching with the Ravens, interviewing, going through that process. It's not really until they put the staff together that they'll bring the staff together and they'll start evaluating and the roster and watching film, and they'll decide, okay, this is what we really want to prioritize from a staff as a staff. So obviously, I would think that by the combine, you would think that they would have that DC in place and really have the roster by and large in place.
Yeah,
Especially staff.
I do wonder, given how big of a offseason this is and how much like Andrew has even stated, like we're going to spend money in free agency on offensive talent, and we're going to go out and draft a bunch of players and probably going to have a lot of turnover. I think that's what he uses. We expect to be the youngest team
Yeah.
in the NFL, which is like a crazy ominous term. If you are like 28 or 30 on that offense, you're like, oh, so they're not going to renew my contract, right? I thought it was wild that Andrew just straight up said that. Like, it's more transparent than he's been in the past. But yeah, given that they're going to expect that much turnover, right? There's going to be the draft, free agency. Do you think having these processes take longer? Like, Andrew Berry's usually at the Senior Bowl, right? I've seen him every time I've been down there. He's clearly not going to be there. Wasn't there this time because he was in this whole head coach fiasco, right? Do you think they feel strong enough about the people, maybe like the people that they have running these things, because Andrew's not involved, or because they don't have a head coach, because they don't have like their 1 and 2s available? Do they feel strongly enough about the work they're able to get out of these guys to where it's not going to deeply affect them or make them more hesitant in free agency than they need to be?
No, I don't think so. And honestly, like a lot of this work has been done. I remember like a lot of the grunt work when it comes to approaching free agency is like done during the season, toward the end of the season. Like when you're like they by the time the season ends, I mean, like the couple days afterward, they're literally having meetings on like, hey, this is what we're prioritizing in the off season in terms of free agency. These are guys, like they already have like a list of guys that they really want to target. And obviously I think that might shift a little bit now that they have a head coach in place who has who has ties to guys across the league, especially obviously in Baltimore specifically. So that might change a little bit, but like the work has been done by and large. And obviously, like it's nice to have the GM out there, but they send their assistant GMs out there. They send their scouts, their national scouts, their regional scouts. All those guys are like doing. They're all across the country, and they were at the Senior Bowl, they're at the Shrine Bowl. They were putting in that work. So I don't have any reservations about that. It's really about like getting the staff in place and then really like prioritizing. Now that you have the staff in place, and especially obviously a head coach, like really prioritizing what you want to do. So I think that all that is by and large in place. It's just a matter of like getting the right guys that are from the Browns perspective, getting the right guys on the coaching level that are going to like coach up whoever you bring in. Like the scouting process in terms of free agency, that's by and large done. And then obviously we're going to transition into the combine where they really put that into high gear.
All right. Thank you for keeping us up to date. Make sure you check out Daniel on ESPN.com. He is the beat reporter for the Cleveland Browns here. Appreciate you giving us some time here, Daniel.
Anytime, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. Cool. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right. Well, that's my thoughts. That's a little bit of the most recent information I could get from the people involved in the situation. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.